The fresh snow melted into deep puddles that fed the lights of the city like blood cut from lumescent corpses. The sky gardens stooped over and bent their reflections in the cab window as if bowing to the air traffic, one after another, as the blurring trail of vehicles shattered in the orderly glass. Rocket emissions cut in the dark like illegal fireworks, lighting the uncanny faces of teenagers in neo-punk clothing throwing snow at each other like children. Lee leaned back in the taxi seat. It felt like he could merge with the material beneath him. In the rush and flurry of the case, he had adjusted to the strangeness of what had passed in VR, but it had left a lingering impact. These were strange times. He was in a strange place. Perhaps none of this should feel normal. His stomach lurched as the taxi rose onto a sky bridge and past a hovering limousine. A young man dressed in a silver suit with a red bow tie was leaning out the rooftop with a look of mania, sticking his tongue out and trying to catch the snowflakes as if they were a desirable drug. High at the top of the skyline, the car drifted past an office building. Lee watched the silhouettes of the office workers moving vaguely like impressions from behind a veil. It was hard to believe that he had spent his life in this city. Did he used to just watch it like this? Was this how things were meant to feel? It did not seem like there were physical, understandable rules not just for the conduct and the expected rewards of their work, but for the shape and the form into which humanity had been sorted. He looked up at the skyline and felt as if he could see their culture manifesting. It was all the words of the zealous preachers, the lost city youth, the misfits and the freaks. It all joined together like starlight that rose upwards instead of drifting down. He could see it joining the thick spillage of flakes that crashed and melted into the towers veined with purple neon. He could see it come together to form a portal in the sky. This might be the last generation living. How many people who could afford it were already submerged in VR, dying willingly, somewhere deep below? They would have no descendants. Already the population was half what it had been 20 years ago. The last of humanity would sever themselves from earthly contemplation, children, family, friendship, responsibility, history, tradition, continuation. In an earlier and simpler time, people were born into the reality in which they died. Now people could not only make God, but culture itself in their own image, and the electric Glade. The Glade was the final destination. A creative terminal velocity that sought to complete a paradigm shift that had finally rendered even heaven obsolete. And Rubissieux, standing in the high citadel of this city, had made it all possible. The cab fare was automatically taken from his digital ID. He stepped into the cold air outside his apartment building and really felt, for the first time in years, the wind on his skin. Exhausted, overwhelmed, the lieutenant and the insanity of the VR ringing around his head like horrible, catchy music, he rode the elevator to his floor. As soon as he got inside, he poured a small whiskey, waved the windows to transparent, and sat on the couch, listening to the sound of the air traffic. His android switched on and stepped out with blank eyes into the living room. It began to clean up the sticky patches under the whiskey bottle and wipe down the kitchen counters. Lee didn't even change the settings to stop it. He didn't care. It didn't bother him anymore, he realized. It was so clear that this machine was not living, was no man, was no substitute or competitor. These things of metal and plastic were an even thinner imitation than the perennial dreams of cyberspace for their new aristocracy. Why should he care anymore? This was it, this was rock bottom, he had arrived there, whatever that meant. This was the seabed, the bedrock, the sensation of drowning. He felt better for the whiskey. Why not have a smoke too? Why not? Why not see what the illegal old world habits felt like? Maybe he would love the taste of fire and smoke. Perhaps he should just quit the police. That's what the lieutenant wanted. He'd had enough of underhanded corruption. Rubissieux could own the fucking department. Maybe he too, like Gong, was done. He could go private. Go private. The thought rang again and again like an echo in his mind, spoken by someone else. Another version of him, sharing his brain. Go private? Be a PI? What, just like Valentino Lee? Maybe he could buy an all-white suit, fold a red handkerchief in his top pocket too. He could slip down into the past and the fantasies there, speak in some wooden, cliched manner half-stitched from the forgotten films of his youth. That's all that dream was. A loose script in a looser reality, a stage so flimsy the props wouldn't stay up. No, he had to get out. Really get out, sell the apartment, disappear like those carbon-hoarding strangers in the countryside. He could slip into the lost corners of this world, leave the mass transit grid itself. He could live somewhere where he had to travel for food, where there was no AI, where they lived in a sustained delusion made possible by their parasitic scrounging off the wealth of the city. No, that was a film, a cheap one. He wasn't going anywhere, and he knew it. He had unfinished business in the city. He opened a drawer in his bedroom and took out a pouch of tobacco the captain had given him a long time ago when he had thought it rude to refuse. A couple of pre-rolled cigarettes had been stuck to the packet. How would he even light one? And where was there loose fire? Gong got lighters from the black market, but he wasn't going that far for a smoke. How do I light this? Lee asked his android, realizing then that he never spoke to it. That was another defense mechanism and boundary he no longer felt the need to maintain. I can create a temperature in the oven that will be sufficient to ignite that, sir. The android walked over to the oven, leaned down, and stuck the tip in. The smell was horrible, but natural. Too close to something he had felt in that giant house, something that had been hidden and buried for decades, uncovered by people like Robert and May Gray. Here you are, sir, the android said, and passed him the smoldering cigarette. Lee held it clumsily like a pen and sucked on it. It tasted terrible. He choked and spat out the smoke. It was like breathing in a burning building, but it gave him a rush of lightheadedness too. There was something raw about it, though. Gong always drank when he smoked the most. Perhaps that was better? He poured another whiskey and took a deep drink. That settled his throat. The second drag went down easier. It was like breathing in an enemy. There was some resistance or struggle, but it was enjoyable to overcome it. It is my responsibility to inform you that smoking tobacco is a harmful activity and illegal. If conducted repeatedly, I must inform the police. I am the police, Lee said. He took the cigarette and whiskey and walked over to the window to watch the snow in the city. There was a silence while the android stood perfectly still in the kitchen. Lee could hear its processor whirring. According to my search, you are currently suspended and not a working police officer. Fuck off, Lee said, wiped at the air and turned the thing off. He had to face what was coming, stick it out, be reprimanded, shoved back down into the dark. He filled the apartment with a playlist of his favorite music as the night came on. He pushed himself working out until he was sweating hard. He wanted to be exhumed. He wanted all trace of the VR washed out of him, physically and mentally. Beyond his windows, the evening streets began to glow like halos in the gloom, like salvation rising from the gutters. The snow came in dying spells that melted on the glass and turned to a pinching frost that put spider webs of ice in the corners. It would be easy to sleep, Lee knew, and to let new dreams wash away the old. He was awoken by his earpiece and an incoming call. Had he forgotten to take it out again? It was dark, nighttime dark. What time was it? What day was it? He fumbled around. It was almost midnight, and Gong was calling. Yeah, what is it? He croaked. There's this place on Shin Boulevard, joint with a sassy owner, Little May. You know it, yeah? Yeah, real sleazy, fish tanks, private tables. What are you doing, netting the beauties? Not this time. Something a little bit heavier. You gonna come join me? Coming to, Lee felt dread at the memory of the lieutenant, and whatever else was waiting for him down the pipeline. He knew Gong, and whatever he had planned would only drag him further down into the muck. But what choice did he have? Who else did he have? A decade of night shifts had left him with no other real friends left. Alright, Lee said. Make sure there's a drink waiting, yeah? Gong cut the line. Lee flicked on the apartment functions, his sense of time and space disoriented, as if in the grip of some waning illness.
He stumbled a couple times and found himself doing strange motions to pick up the towel in the bathroom.
It was almost like he wanted
to step back
or replay certain motions. He forced himself into the boiling hot shower and dressed casually. He used the wax, now left out by the sink, to sweep his hair down over to the side, feeling the back. He looked more like a dealer than a cop, fitting for a place on Shin Boulevard. He took the elevator down to the street and began to walk, grateful for the cleansing winter air. The snow had turned to icy waste, and most of the storefronts were empty. There was a gang of wasters at the corner singing tunelessly. A homeless man with a turban of torn cloth was sitting in the middle of the crosswalk, gurgling in a broken voice. A police drone hovered up to him and put a high beam on his face. Beyond the entranceway canopies, under the sweeping tiled eaves, the all-night barbecue stands were filling up. Past the rumble of heating machinery, he watched the identical androids move from one great table of artificial meat to another. Some air traffic zoomed by, their taillights making fake moonlight in the puddles on the roads. The occasional boom of an early spring festival firework hidden from the drone scanners, screaming like the waking of a machine. The bar was tucked down an alley that smelt of cheap food and the vestiges of a night already peaked that wouldn't thin out till sunrise. A couple of android prostitutes dressed like nurses stood on the alleyway corner, blowing him kisses. Lee ducked his head and felt the greasy fumes of a nearby restaurant fill the dark like clotting fog. The royal blue neon of the dangling sign took up the entire front of the slouching, damp-strewn building. A small vendor next door was selling hard drink to a group of young men, each with an android prostitute at their side. The bouncer was a military model. its face clutched from the corners of a dystopian panic attack. It scanned Lee's ID and stepped aside. He still had his cop status on there, even if it was soon to go. Inside the bar were several rows of sticky tables in the half-light, giant fish tanks fixed on every wall. There was 100 half-drunk beer bottles thrown about the place, scattered in the growing rancor and din. A beautiful waitress watched him curiously as he passed. A bald man with a huge beard and stupidly large muscles, veins popping from his forehead, was arm wrestling an android and winning. And there in the corner, past the figures of more drowning youth in illuminated post-punk fashion, was Gong, all alone, sat like a crime lord wreathed in smoke. He was dressed suavely, and in the melee and the straining light, for a moment, Lee thought it was Illinois Slim. He felt what could only be a fracturing in his mind. He had the urge to somehow conjure up a reverse motion and send everything backwards and start again. Feeling unsteady, to balance himself, he put his hand to the back of someone's chair. Lee took his hand away and gathered himself. He trod over the filthy floor, the weight of the decadence all about him. Gon slipped a beer over to him. Lee sat back in his chair. "What's going on?" Lee asked. "Take out your contacts and earpiece now and give them to me," Gong said, clipping open a small case. Lee did as he said and carefully passed over the equipment. Gong placed them in the case and snapped it shut. He looked over Lee's shoulder and peered around. "We should be good," he said quietly. "Might seem paranoid, but wouldn't be surprised if one of us had a tail. You notice anyone on your back?" "No." "Me neither. Maybe they think we're broken, eh?" "We're not." "Now we ain't. We got one more round to go, eh? We're gonna dig our way out of this hole." "What are you talking about?" Lee said. "It's done. It's over. Ruby Shoe's got a hand up the lieutenant's ass. The machine has ground us down." "Not yet it ain't," Gong said, taking a drag on his cigarette. "After I left the precinct, I spent the evening with the captain. And those IDs we found under that warehouse. Captain got a backdoor feed into the interviews that the lieutenant gave them at the hospital. They were all young women who were reported missing. Some of them had been drugged so they could barely remember who they were, but others talked. They were playthings, puppets, for fucked up games down there in the Glade, like that train shit they had us on. And guess what? There's hundreds more, they reckon. And not just runaways, but society girls like Joy Grey being dragged down for special events. We were right all along." "Why?" Lee asked. "Why the hassle? Why not just conjure up more AIs down there for them to play with?" "'Cause it ain't real," Gong said. "And the users in the Glade want the best, right? That girl we saved on the train, she weren't no construct, no fucking AI. You knew that when you saw her, you told me, yeah, didn't you? Right, those other freaks we battled it out with, right, they knew the girl was real. The games are real, right? It's just like Harry said. They don't want to play against machines, it's background and stuffing. Hanshu is grooming women up here, I reckon. Young women, that's what I think. I think there might be hundreds, maybe thousands of people kept in VR pods, being used for torture and dirty games in the Glade. They must be keeping them alive somehow, right? And who else but Ruby Shoe could foot the cost of that? I don't know how much the lieutenant knows, but he don't care. And we ain't got the tech or the treasure to compete. The only way our department even has the one diving pool is because of donors like Ruby Shoe. It's always been a city of spiders, and you and me are just a couple of flies twitching on the edges." "Yes, so what do you want?" "I want to finish the job, clear my name, get the retirement that I broke my fucking back for." "Yeah, how are you gonna do that?" "Harris is gonna lend us a couple of pods, and you and me are going diving one last time." "You must be mad," Lee said, taking a sip of beer and shaking his head. "This is something, even for you." "You think I came up with this? Captain's orders. This is bigger than either of us now. There's internal division ripping through the precinct like a fucking fault line. Oh yeah, there's a civil war coming, I can feel it. Captain and Lieutenant are gonna battle it out, right? The Commissioner hasn't called it yet, but unless we get something irrefutable, something that moves the city, unless we get those society kids back, there's a purge coming. And if you think this ends with us just being thrown off the force, you ain't been paying attention." "What do you mean?" "They're gonna railroad us. They're gonna take Dream Crime down. The Glade is the most highly valued asset in the city and everyone wants a slice. You know how much they pay to rent space down there? You can't even buy land. Only leasehold it for a decade at most. There's bigger people than cops that want to change that, right? Get a piece of the pie, and Ruby Shoe is the key. They're gonna let her and her fucking nutbag son do what they want as long as she gives them a piece of the winnings, but they're swarming her now. Look, this goes all the way, and we ain't ever gonna find the top. We were never meant to find Joy Grey. This case was pawned off on us because they thought we'd fail. And if we accidentally found something, well, because of our history, they'd slam us down to internal affairs. You get that now? But they underestimated us, and they didn't know how good Harris was. Bet they thought we'd be picked up and thrown out soon as we dived into the Glade. But we found something, didn't we, at the Gray's house, right? We found the connection with Han's shoe. We got through the Glade, and we found something real in that warehouse. We found the damn thread that's gonna pull this whole fucking thing open.
We can't finish this playing the hero, Lee said. It's too heavy. We're in too deep.
Hero?
Gong repeated.
Don't you get it? This ain't about that. The lieutenant is going to try and use us to discredit and close down the whole dream crime department. They'll say it was causing fracturing in their offices and stick you in an asylum to back it up. I bet you he's getting shares in the Glade from Shu, right? And in return, he makes sure the police stay away from her domain. It's the oldest kickback in the book. Knowing what I know, I'll be dead or missing within a year. Believe me, I've been doing this shit since before you were born. We got one chance to get ourselves out of this hole. We gotta blow the lid off this whole situation, right? Prove beyond any doubt what Ruby and Hanshu are into. Pull back some citizens the city actually gives a fuck about from the pods, and with the captain and enough media on our backs, we can swing the commissioner and bring this bastard home.
This is too much. We're definitely out of our depths here.
Maybe. But we're in for it now anyway. Harris is waiting for us at the facility. Captain roped him in. We got time for one last dive. We won our ticket to the grand finale, didn't we? We're gonna cash it in. Take our places, get to the administration, find Hanshu, get a trace on him and bring this whole thing topside. We're dream crime detectives, ain't we? Well, let's solve the fucking case.
After what we found, the security in the Glade is gonna be tighter than ever. They're gonna be looking for people diving. Even if we do get in there again, they'll find us.
Nah, there's no way they suspect it. They think we're broken, right? They don't know we got Harris and the captain.
Guess they don't know how crazy you are either.
Shit, it's gonna be hairy, but what else you got? They're gonna lock you away, Lee. Make an example of you. Break you. They're gonna put you in a fucking psychiatric hospital and I'm gonna get a bullet to the back of the head. If we do nothing, that's how this ends. You get it?
Harris is waiting for us at the pool.
Yeah, with a big bag of chronozine like a fucking time-travelling Santa Claus. We got a couple hours in the pond. No one except Harris will be there until morning. We could get 10, maybe even 12 hours in the Glade. One last dive, take our place in the grand finale, whatever the fuck that is. Meet the administrators and come home with Hanshu and Joy Grey.
Into the belly of the beast.
Yeah, tear a fucking hole in it, Gong said. Blow the whole thing open and ride on up through the spout.
You're out of your mind.
Gong tipped his head back and laughed hard. He lit another cigarette, his face swamped in murky light. Lee looked over at the revelers dancing in the dark, dancing and twirling. The smoke of illegal tobacco draped upon their shoulders like a curtain of thinning fog. Lee looked at Gong closely and saw a glimmer of gold teeth and the huge head of Illinois Slim. He put a hand to his own greased hair and looked down just to check that he wasn't wearing an all-white suit. But Gong was right, and he knew it. They had unfinished business and one more dive to go.